We're going to review for our test on Unit 9. When you read through, please read very carefully. This is talking about the total number of seats, so that is our y, or our f of x. You can see that here is equal to x squared minus 6x minus 7. It tells us x is the number of rows, and then it's asking us about the number of rows. So this is asking about x. If there's a total of 713 seats, that is our y. So we need to make sure that we put that 713 in the correct spot. And if we're looking for x, then we can simply move our 713 to the one side. Right? If we're going to graph, all of our numbers have to be on the same side. And you can see here that I did graph my equation. I have two roots because we're looking for our x. So x equal, we're looking for the roots. The zeros, the x-intercepts, the solutions. And I have x is negative 24. And I have positive 30. Now remember, we are looking for the number of rows. So if I say I have negative 24 rows, well, that does not make sense. But 30 rows does. So we need to make sure that we're paying attention to the context of the problem. So the answer to this one is 30 rows. Remember, you have to move everything to the same side, and then you can graph in Desmos. On number 2, we have this beautiful picture. Now they're asking us for our equation. So they're asking us for ax squared plus bx plus c. So you can use number 4, list in spreadsheets, if you are using the yellow calculator. And then you would use menu 416. I used Desmos so I could put a picture for you in. So I added my table, right? Remember, these are our x's and y's. Make sure you put those in correctly. Then I went ahead, if you're in Desmos, you're going to type this. If you're in the yellow calculator, menu 416, and it gives you your a. So we'll write negative 5x squared. Your b is 14. We're going to use x there, sorry. Plus 3. And this would be our equation for that. We did that a couple of minutes ago. For number 3, I would again move everything to the same side. And then I would graph in Desmos for x squared minus 64, which you can see I did here. Because it is asking about our rocks, right? Our roots, our zeros, our x-intercepts, and our solutions. So you can see it says equation has only one. Nope. Has no. So no real solutions means that on your graph, it is not touching the x-axis. It is above or it's below. But we are crossing the x-axis. Infinite will never have infinite. It just has these two. For this one, you have a graph, and it's asking you to find the rocks. So we're going to look at the graph for that, and then we're also going to write the factors. And remember, factors mean that we have our x and our number on the same side. So when I zoom in on this, I can see I have a root at negative 1, and I also have one at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So x equals negative 1. And x equals 5. So I can come down here and I can say, okay, it's going to be b and it's going to be e. But then if I want to write my factors, I need my x and my number on the same side. So I have to move this negative 1 over. And when I cross the equals, I have to change the sign. So x plus 1. This is a positive 5, so I'm going to subtract it, and x minus 5. So remember, that's going to be a, and that is going to be d. Look very carefully at your sign, and remember that your factors and your roots always have different signs. This one's a little bit tricky. We did function notation a while back. If you recall, function notation f of x, okay, and what that's saying is that the number in the parentheses is equal to our x. So you can see here, if I have f of x and I write it, the x is where the -5 is. So this is actually a root, a 0 and x-intercept a solution, right? Same thing here. This is saying that our other one is x equals 2. Now, they're asking us for us to write the factors. So again, notice all your answers. The x's and the numbers are on the same side. So I'm going to minus my 2. So x minus 2 is one solution. Be careful because there is a plus 2 there. And then we talked about if you have a fraction, right? Fractions mean divide. So we're dividing by 4, and the opposite is to multiply by 4. So 4x equals, if I do 4 times 5 over 4, I just get 5. You can do that in your calculator. And again, we need to move the 5 on the same side with the x. It's a positive. So we're going to subtract it. Remember, the signs are different. This was a positive in the root. It's a negative in the factor. This is actually I covered up my negative when I did this, so I apologize. This should be a -5, so we're going to add it. When I drew my rainbow, I covered that up and missed it. So 4x plus 5. Again, those signs are going to be different. Here, this is from last unit. It says you can put it in Desmos to double check. You'd have to write the equation first. So that isn't really very valid here. Key features, vertex, if you remember, your vertex is going to be your highest or your lowest point. That is your HK. So it shows us right here, HK. So we're going to write it as a coordinate, 200, 800. It is a max vertex because it is at the top, and its value is always the K, so, or your Y value. So 800. Our axis of symmetry, X equals our H, and our H is 2. Remember, that's your line that cuts your graph in half, 20. And then your zeros, we've been doing that, rocks, 0, 0, and 0, 40, or 40, 0, excuse me. You could also write with the braces, 0 and 40. Remember, the braces mean their individual numbers, not a coordinate. And then your y-intercept also happens to be 0, 0. List the solutions. Again, we're looking at the rocks. So probably the easiest thing to do is to graph this. If you wanted to factor, you could, and change those factors equal to 0 if you felt like that was something you wanted to do. I went ahead and graphed these, and you can see the different colors. So this first one is red. So on the red, you can see here that I have -7, and I have +7. So I would say x equals, make sure you put your signs. For the 49, a +49, that one happens to be blue. Well, it is way up here. It is not crossing the x-axis, so this is no solution, zeros, x-intercepts, no rocks. The -14 is green. So I'm going to zoom in here a little bit so you can see some very ugly decimals. So for that one, we would write x equals, we could just call it -3.7 and +3.7. Remember, it's not always going to be the same number with a positive and a negative. And then x squared plus 14, I did in purple. And you can see that one up here. You can see that that is also not touching the x-axis. So this one has no rocks. What is the solution set? So again, we're talking about the rocks here. Everything needs to be on the same side. So 2x squared minus 3x minus 14. I've graphed it. Now, I did get a decimal, and we talked about how you can put that into Desmos, click the little fraction button, and it will tell you what it is as a fraction. So my solution set is -2, and you can write 7/2, or 3.5. But then for our factors, right, that's where x is and the number are on the same side. So if I have x equals -2, to move it over, I need to add 2. So there's one of my factors. I also have x equals 7/2. So again, to undo a denominator, we're going to have to multiply by it and then move our number to the other side. It's a +7. So it's going to become a -7. So again, your signs on your roots and your factors should be the opposite. This one is a very similar one as well. Everything's already on the same side. So our rocks, -17, +17. And then again, when we move everything to the same side, just kind of squeeze it in here, x plus 17. And x minus 17. Okay, so domain and range. Domain is x and range is y. So I've graphed both of these just so we can see both of them. So A is going to be green. So over here, you can see this is just going to keep going. So since it's just going to keep going, that means our domain is all real numbers. So you'll either see the symbol or they'll write it out, all real numbers. The range, however, remember something is less than y is less than something. This does not have a bottom. No bottom down here. So we're not going to put anything in this first space. Okay. We have a top, which is at 0, right? Because we're looking at the y's. So our range is y is less than or equal to, because it is touching that line, 0. If we look at the purple one, again, domain, all real numbers, and your domain will always be all real numbers unless there's some situation that goes with the parabola. Our range, something is less than y is less than something. I do have a bottom this time. It is 0. It is touching, but I don't have a top. So we can write it like this. Sometimes they will write the letter first. So either of these would be acceptable. This is transformations from the last unit. So I've graphed x squared and I've graphed negative quantity x divided by 2 all squared. So you can see, describe the transformation. So it reflected over the x. Because it's going the opposite. And then it didn't go left, right. It didn't go up, down, but notice that it did get wider. Now, this is in the parentheses, and in the parentheses was the fly machine. So that is actually a horizontal, and it's getting wider. So that's going to be a horizontal stretch. Because if you're thinking about the fly machine, and when your arms go out, they are stretching. When they come in, they are compressing. What are the solutions? Again, just more of the same. Make sure all of our numbers are on the same side. This one does happen to be in vertex form. So if you didn't want to graph it, I'll show you how we did square root formula before. If you wanted to graph it, which you can see I've done here, you would get -7 and +1. If you wanted to solve this with the square root method, you could divide by the -2 because we're wanting to get everything away from the x on the square root method. So x plus 3 squared, -32 divided by 2 is 16, and then we would take the square root. So square root and a squared are opposite, so x plus 3 plus or minus 4 when we take the square root, because it could be a -4 times a -4 or a +4 times a +4. So we have negative 3 plus 4, which is where we get the positive 1, or we have negative 3 minus 4, which is where we get that negative 7. So there's a couple of different ways you could solve these. This one is talking about, again, the zeros. You could also factor this one if you wanted. I feel like most of you are probably going to just graph, which is fine too. So here are zeros, and then remember your factors. You're going to have to move everything to the same side, and that sign does change. So x plus 3 and x minus 5. You could start with your roots and work backwards here, or you could simply graph them all and see which picture matches. So looking at this, we have roots at negative 4 and 0, and the one that has negative 4 and 0 is the black line. So it would be D. You could say, x equals 0 and x equals negative 4 if you wanted to work backwards. So you would have x times x plus 4, and then you would distribute. So that is another way that you could solve this. If you're happy with looking at the graph, that works as well. Here we have a word problem. The function models the relationship. It says P is the profit, okay, and X is years. And then it says how many years. So we are looking for the X, and it tells you the profit is 160. So that's going to be our Y, or our P in this case. So if I have 160 equals x squared minus 8x plus 85, I do need to move that 160 to the same side. So x squared minus 8x minus 105. I have graphed that. So now I have x is negative 7. Remember, x is years. Negative 7 years and 15 years. Well, you can't go back in time, so it would need to be a positive. Remember, on word problems for real life situations, it's going to be that positive answer. This one is also asking about the positive solution, so we can minus 10, and we can graph it. Positive solution is 5. Okay, so we have another word problem here. It tells you the area. Now, if you're going to graph this, you need to make sure you change those L's to X's. Otherwise, the computer is not going to understand that. And remember, this is what is the length of the garden in feet. We have negative 13 feet, and we have 8 feet. Again, you cannot have negative measurements. So 8 feet is going to be your answer. More of the same. When we graph this, I did get a decimal for one of my solutions. So I did put it into Desmos, and I got negative 3 over 4. So remember, for your factors, right, these are our rocks, but for our factors, we need everything on the same side with the x. This one, we would need to multiply by the 4, because it's the denominator, and then move the 3 over. And again, I know I said it before, make sure those signs are different. Quadratic formula. This is on your formula chart. We talked about everything needs to be on the same side before you start plugging things in. So you have 1x squared plus 8x minus 9. So your A is 1. Your B is 8, and your C is negative 9. So we're going to plug those numbers into the formula. Now my B is a positive, so it's going to become a negative. Plus or minus big square root. And when you put this B into your big square root, you need to make sure you put it in parentheses and do that in your calculator. Otherwise, the computer is going to solve it wrong. So parentheses 8 squared, that's my b, minus 4, it's always a minus 4, times a is 1, times c is negative 9, all over 2 times 1 is a. And then you can put all of this underneath the square root in your calculator, which I have done over here. I got 100. So I have x equals negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 100 all over 2. I know the square root of 100 is a nice, pretty, perfect square. So negative 8 plus or minus 10 over 2. And this is actually 2 separate math problems. We have negative 8 plus 10 over 2. And I put that in my calculator. I got 1. Negative 8 minus 10 over 2. And again, I put that in my calculator. I got negative 9. These are our roots. You can also see that I graphed this equation right here. And I can also check it in the calculator that way. Usually if it says specifically to solve with the quadratic formula, they're probably going to ask you a question like which one of these is set up correctly. Last one, I've graphed this and it only had one root. Remember, this plus or minus means that there is actually 2. We only had 1. This says only is 5/3 positive. So if I had put 5/3 into my calculator and changed it to a decimal, it would be 1.6 repeating. 1 and 3, that doesn't make sense. 5 and 5/9 does not make sense. So our answer is B. Good luck on your test.